Thank you all for joining us. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes so that more people can log in.
Thomas, we can hear you.
Thank you all so much for joining us. We're very excited to share this webinar on the situation in Venezuela right now. Little means of introduction. Lisa Sullivan is the Senior Program Officer for Integral Ecology at the Maryknoll Office for Global Concerns. And she has lived and worked in Venezuela for 30 years, arriving in the early 1980s. She raised her 3 children in the barrios of Barquisimeto, where she did community organizing as a Maryknoll missioner. She's led over 20 delegations to Venezuela, including for members of Congress, universities, solidarity groups, health, teacher, and legal organizations. And during the Venezuelan food crisis, she converted her land in the foothills of the Andes Mountains into a community farm and permaculture center. Lisa left Venezuela 2 years ago, and like most Venezuelan families, her family is scattered, currently living in 5 different countries around the world. So I'll let Lisa take it over. I know we have a lot to cover, but if any questions arise over the course of the webinar, please feel free to add it in the chat. We'd like to have this be as participatory as possible, so I'm very eager to look over your questions and share those at the end.
Thank
All
you
right,
so
Lisa,
much.
all yours.
You're right. Thank you, Thomas, and welcome everybody. I can't see people's names right now, but I'm pretty sure there are many other people here who share a deep, deep love for Venezuela and who have lived there themselves. And so really important to gather and to share about what's happening down there. I'm going to try to share maybe a half hour or so and then leave it open for questions and input as well. I'm going to start by trying to share my screen, which is always my challenge. Let's see if I can do this. Share. Can you see it okay? Whoops, now I'm going. Can you see that okay, Thomas? Can you confirm for me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great. All right. So as Thomas said, I have been in Venezuela for most of my adult life. Here's one of the earlier pictures of me in Venezuela in the early 80s. I'd already been living in Latin America as a college student and met a Venezuelan and married and basically carried out my life mostly in Venezuela. And most of those years, 20 of those years, I was a Maryknoll lay missioner. And I did community work in the city of Barquisimeto, a pretty large city, where I lived with my family in Barrio José Pérez Rivas. one of the many, many sprawling poor barrios in the western side of the city. And it was an incredible set of years, privileged to accompany so many amazing people in this community who were so involved in so many initiatives to improve their community, whether that was with health, with children, with youth, with women, just so many projects in those years that together with so many people that we created. And so they were hard years, and yet they were wonderful years, the 80s and the 90s in Venezuela. Shortly after I arrived in Venezuela, an event took place that really marks what we have now in Venezuela. And this was an event which took place on the 27th of February, 1989, in which a president had recently been inaugurated, Carlos Andrés Pérez, promising not to carry out the IMF measures, the economic measures that would really squeeze the people. And yet he went ahead and implemented them almost as soon as he was inaugurated. And so all of a sudden, people with, terrible salaries had no way of even getting on a bus. They went to the buses, to the streets one Monday morning, could barely afford to go to work and coming back. And so there was just a reaction on the tails already of increasing poverty in Venezuela. At that point, poverty was close to 80%. In a very wealthy country with a lot of oil. And so there was just kind of a very spontaneous reaction of the people, especially in Caracas, just reacted and started to turn over buses and burn tires, et cetera, et cetera. And the reaction of the president was to call the military into the streets for basically just people being frustrated and expressing that. And so shooting began, and by the time these three terrible days had ended, 3,000 people had been killed. And something this had never happened in Venezuela. And so this really deeply marked Venezuela forever, really, and made them realize that their, quote, democracy that they'd had for decades really did not have the people at heart. So a few years later, an event took place which also really marked what we have now, and that is an attempted coup by Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Chavez, who at that point almost no one had heard of. I happened to be in Caracas that night, the night of February 3rd and February 4th. We heard tanks, we heard shooting, we heard airplanes, and the next thing, silence. There's a state of siege. We hear that the government palace was attacked, and the next thing on the TV, this young man appears. And the defense minister made probably what he regretted a decision to put the person responsible for this coup on TV. And so Chavez spoke to the nation for the first time. I think he spoke all of like 3 minutes. But he electrified the population because he said, I take full responsibility. Yes, I was trying to overthrow this government, which does not have the interests of people at hand. But he said, por ahora, for the moment we have failed. And so that buzzword, por ahora, just stuck in people's minds and hearts. And of course, Chavez was taken to jail along with the other commanders of this attempted coup. But the streets of Venezuela were just filled with that phrase, por ahora, for now, meaning that there was a hope that some major change would come about. So that's how Chavez really burned into the image of the Venezuelan people in 1992. Well, he was soon out of jail. The following president pardoned him and pretty much won on that promise. His name was Caldera. And so once Chavez was pardoned and out, he also ran on a ticket to run for president in 1998. And his main promise was that of rewriting a constitution. The idea that Venezuelans wanted a change, and the way to have that change would be through putting their ideas down on paper and trying to make that the guide for their country. And so Chavez won in 1998, December, and immediately that process began of rewriting the Constitution. And it was a really fascinating moment, just tremendous participation, discussion in communities on all sorts of issues. What would it say about children's rights? What would it say about, healthcare, et cetera? So for months, this whole process took place. And then the following December, there was a vote and it won by 70% approval of this constitution. So kind of what this new moment brought was a sense of we can bring about change by democracy. We could bring about change by participation. That's what really electrified the population. Now, it's important to know what I think most of us know, why Venezuela is so important to the world. It's because it's sitting on the world's biggest pot of oil. Gotta move my picture to see the statistics. It has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, 308 billion barrels. And so by the time Chavez was elected, Venezuela was pumping 3.8 million barrels a day. Now, recently that's fallen to about a fifth of that, only about a half of that, 500,000, 600,000 barrels a day. So another, just so folks know, I'm giving this background because in order to understand the current elections, it's really key to understand what led up to this. So another really important moment was in 2002, 3 years after Chavez had been elected, or 2.5. There were massive protests. There was a strong opposition to Chavez always. There was a strong set of leaders, and he also had a strong group of people who opposed him. And there were massive protests. And at one of these protests, snipers killed several of the protesters. Snipers poised on a bridge. And so with that news, people were outraged, and that in a peaceful protest there would be killings. And so Chavez, the next thing we knew, was swept away, out of power, taken away, and the opposition declared themselves the winners. That suddenly they were now in charge of the government, and they swore in this man named Pedro Carmona, who was the head of the business bureau at that point. He basically swore himself in as president while Chavez was being held on an island in the Caribbean there. Well, many people didn't take well to that, and it was soon determined that it was not the government who killed the people in the protest, or apparently it was not the government. It was snipers on the bridge. And so people started to take the streets and to protest this, to ask for the return of their elected president. And within a day or so, just the whole country filled with the streets filled. And finally, the head of the military went to this island and brought Chavez back. And the opposition left. They left the palace, left some of their shoes behind, they left running, and Chavez returned. And so what this moment meant, I think, for Chavez and for Venezuela was that until that point, people had elected him, but they had done nothing more than elect him. They didn't really have to put themselves on the line. And so really taking the streets and insisting that he be brought back to power was their way of really making a pact, I would say, that we're here for you. And so Chavez's response to that, I think, was to really realize the reason he was elected was to bring about major change and to allow this tremendous oil wealth that Venezuela has and somehow dignify the lives of the people of that country. And so the kind of concept that he came up with was this concept of missions. In other words, let's try to do a lot of things and let's do it fast. So it's a mission. It's something that we all believe in. We're all going to be part of. And so rather than wait and pass laws and bureaucracy, let's do it now. Let's do it yesterday. And so over the next set of years, a number of these missions were launched. The first ones were these education missions. And I'll say that's when I honestly got on board with this whole project. Until then, I had my reservations, the whole issue of the coup and, military personnel, his original coup had made me kind of wonder if this is the way, this is what we want in a leader. But the missions really brought me on board because there was so much excitement in the communities that I worked in. The education missions were phenomenal, in every community and in every school, in evenings, in weekends, in parks, in churches, community centers. They were converted to schoolrooms, and it was beautiful. Older people, started with older people who had never learned to read and write, and I just saw such dignification of those people who took it so seriously. And the teachers were volunteer teachers, and And then the next phase was elementary school, and the next phase was high school, and the next phase was university. And there was a set of years where, so many Venezuelans were studying. I mean, there were so many dreams and so much hope. And so much collective effort, I would say, at improving the country. But there were missions on all sorts of levels. There was the health mission that began by bringing Cuban doctors to just thousands of communities right into the heart of a poor community. They were housed with families or housed in a school. And it was fast. All this happened really fast. There was a mission, the tree mission, that plant trees all over. There was the mission Negripolita, people who were, street people living on the streets or were handicapped, and the housing mission, which ended up building millions of housing units. So during these years, it was clear a lot was being done, and in a positive way, and that was being funded by oil, okay, which meant that there was a big pot of oil, a lot of money, but the industry itself was not really getting was not being taken care of, and it began to be depleted, as did the price of oil through the years. During those years, I was able to meet President Chavez. It was through my work with Roy Bourgeois, the head of School of the Americas Watch. We met with him to ask him to withdraw Venezuelan troops from the School of the Americas, and he was the first president to agree to do that. Several other Latin American leaders went on to do the same thing. But following that, I had a number of opportunities. I met with President Chavez, and I think one of the most meaningful for me was one time his team actually called me up and asked me to organize one of his weekly A los Presidentes, because he wanted dedicated to Monsignor Romero, Oscar Romero. This is before Romero had become a saint, but he wanted to honor that date, the 24th of March, and also he wanted to honor the anniversary of the Latin American bishops Puebla document. And so I was really moved. He wants, these programs on Sundays were listened to by so many people, and he wanted to dedicate it to someone who, to me, was such a significant figure. So that led me to really want to show what was happening in Venezuela. People started to ask me to lead delegations, and I really had no idea how to lead a delegation, but I started to say yes. And one after another began to want to come down. People were seeing hope, seeing changes, and on so many levels, education, health. So I did. I started saying yes and leading delegations, which led me all around the country. I went, from one end to another, north, south, east, west, seeing so many different initiatives, connecting people from the U.S. especially, to see what was happening in Venezuela. Fast forward to 2013, and President Chavez had cancer, and a set of not too many months really went downhill. Was flown to Cuba for treatment, didn't work, was flown back, and in March of 2013, he passed away. And there was, of course, a massive outpour of people in the face of his death. Chavez had, before passing, had gone on TV to tell the Venezuelan people, if something happened to him, that they should vote for his vice president, Nicolás Maduro. So sure enough, within months of his death, elections were held, and lo and behold, even though the opposition came together for one candidate, Capriles, Radonsky, Maduro squeaked by with a very, very narrow victory. Many feel still, on the coattails of Chavez. And that was a 5-year period. 5 years later, the opposition decided to boycott the elections, with the exception of one rather minor leader. Elections were held again, and this time, of course, Maduro swept the elections with 67%. To just give background, the past 2 elections. In the ensuing period, the opposition themselves swept the elections at the National Assembly. At the Congress, they tripled the votes of the Socialist official party. But the Supreme Court decided to strip away the 4 of the members, taking away the supermajority, and many things ensued, including massive protests, some of them very violent, some of the reactions to them very violent, and that ended with March 2017, Congress was dissolved. So in comes the role of the United States. United States early on began to put sanctions on specific individuals within Venezuela. As we saw early on, they when the coup happened against Chavez right away, they announced that the self-proclaimed leader was the leader that they would acknowledge. And so the U.S. has from the get-go tried to do anything and everything to stop this whole what's called the Bolivarian Revolution. And sanctions just increased and increased and increased. And under Maduro and under President Trump, they became brutal. They became countrywide sanctions, not just against individuals, but against the whole oil industry, which is the total source of any funds for the whole country. So between the sanctions and what I would say total negligence of the oil industry, which was the economic motor, as well as a lot of ineptitude of governing, Venezuela began to experience inflation, and it got to 1,700,000%, which is actually possible, which means you try to buy something if you have money, and if you wait 10 minutes, the price is going to go up. And so there was an ensuing crazy set of years, horrific set of years in which Venezuela was not able to import food. It had mostly imported food, not grown its own. And people were just going hungry. The average weight loss in those years was 20 pounds. I put a picture of my husband and I there. We're each at least 20 pounds thinner there. But we decided to really dedicate ourselves to growing food those years with children, because again, it was impossible to import food. What this led to, these sanctions, is the group CEPR, Center for Economic Policy Research, has done a great write-up on the impact of sanctions, but they've shown that Venezuela's economy shrank the most of any country not at war in modern recorded history. Under the sanctions, 10 years of sanctions, its economy shrunk to 71% less of what it was GDP, something like 3 times the impact of the US depression. So it was enormous. So what did that lead to? That led to massive migration. 7.7 million Venezuelans have left in the past 10 years, which is the equivalent of if 66 million people from the United States had left. 7.7 million, right? Most of them have gone to Latin America, 6.5, but over 1 million have come to the US. So I'm part of that migration story. These are my children. The top right is my youngest daughter. She's in France with her children. Her husband is French. My oldest son to the bottom right is in the UK. And my son to the left, my middle son and his wife are in Spain. And they were the ones who had hoped to carry out their lives in Venezuela. She's a neurosurgeon, a researcher. And it got to the point where in her experiments that she was doing at the university, the university couldn't even afford the food for the rats. She was making $5 a week. It was more expensive to get to and from work than what she was making as a salary. And my son was hoping to start a restaurant. He was able to have a Michelin restaurant in Spain and hoping to start one now in Venezuela. But those dreams have really disappeared because of what's happening. But again, just to say, our story is the story of Venezuelans of migration. What happened here? Oh dear, lost my place. I'm so sorry. Okay. Just to say too, though, that Venezuela was a place of receiving migrants. The Venezuela that my children grew up in, there were millions of immigrants from other countries. Europe, they opened their arms to Europe after World War II, Italians, Spaniards, Portuguese, to Latin Americans who were fleeing dictatorships, Chile, other countries fleeing economic hardships, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. It was a country with millions of immigrants that they really welcomed. And a country that had liberated 5 other countries with Simón Bolívar. So its history has totally changed from one of receiving immigrants to sending migrants. So given this tremendously difficult economic situation, the current regime of the current President Maduro was quite an impasse, and how to overcome this problem. And so he realized that the one way was probably through allowing elections. And so there was a meeting in Barbados last year with the opposition, which led to an agreement to have fair and free elections, and also kind of a secret agreement with the U.S. that was signed in Qatar, in which the U.S. agreed to remove sanctions slowly if these free and fair elections were to take place. And they even agreed to go ahead and allow some of the sanctions to end immediately, such as with Chevron. So that was quite a motivation for Maduro to actually hold elections. And so the opposition started to really get energized. As I said, the previous election they had boycotted. Most of them had boycotted. But for some reason, this moment was different. And the energy was behind one person. Her name is Maria Corina Machado. She has been around for a long time, really, as long as people have been aware of Chavez. She has been part of the opposition. She's what many people would consider hardcore opposition. When many people were enamored with Chavez and the changes, she was always totally against him. She was, also supported sanctions. She was just, again, not willing. Several times she was not willing to participate in elections. So she was a figure that people knew well, a figure that many considered to be the far right. Very pro-capitalist, very against the oil industry in Venezuela is nationalized. But leading up to these elections, she somehow really captivated the imagination of the Venezuelan people. And I think most people would say because her main mantra was that bring our families home. Let's do something, let's do anything to get rid of this current government so that sanctions end, so that our families are able to return. There's no family in Venezuela that's not affected by migration. And so this was the message that really reached people, much more so than whatever political platform she might have. So primaries were held in last October. For the opposition, they held a set of primaries themselves, and she swept 90% of those primaries. She won by 90%. And the opposition basically united behind her in a united platform. But lo and behold, 2 months later, the Supreme Court of Venezuela declared that she would be barred from participating. So, I think there's a lot of expectations. Once again, the opposition would boycott. What are they going to do? There's supposedly going to be elections, and yet now the main candidate is not being allowed. But she was having massive rallies that were really attended by enormous amounts of people, and it was clear there was support for her. And so what she made the decision to do was to kind of anoint another person, Corina Lloris, to say, well, now I'm barred for running, but I'll pass my candidacy to her. But she was unable to enroll, supposedly technical problems, according to the government. But then at the last minute, the government allowed a man named Edmundo Gonzalez to enroll in the electoral process. And he was supported by Maria Corina, as well as by the heavyweights of the opposition. And Edmundo Gonzalez is a diplomat, a 74-year-old diplomat who no one really had heard of, very kind of mild-mannered man who continued to hold rallies throughout the country leading up to the July elections, always with Maria Corina at his side, and she really did more of the speaking, and the fervor really was for her, but he was the candidate. This is what the card looks like. If you were to go to elections on July 28th, this was what people had to do. They had to mark the card for their candidate. As you can see, 13 times Nicolás Maduro is the candidate, because there's 13 parties mostly left-wing parties who have him as their candidate. It's kind of hard to find Edmundo Gonzalez, but he's there. There's some other really small parties. Some of them tiny, got just a handful of votes, but there they are. They were allowed to run. So that's what it looked like on the day of elections. The day of elections, Venezuelans did turn out massively. 12 million people went to the polls. Those living outside of the country, something like 1% were allowed to vote. They made it so complicated, the procedure to have to be able to enroll in voting, people living in outside. So 7 million, or the adults among those 7 million people, were barred from participating in the elections. That night and days ahead of time, my husband and I, we were constantly on our phone to friends throughout Venezuela. As you can imagine, so many years and so many delegations and so many traveling, we know people well throughout the country. As I put stars with people we were in contact with, and the northern part of Venezuela is pretty much where all the population lives. And there was incredible enthusiasm for the elections. And I would say, of the people we were in touch with, who honestly is people from the poorer sections of the country, I would say 85 or 90% of the people that we were in touch with were enthusiastically backing the opposition. And again, it wasn't for a political platform. It was because they just wanted change. The economic situation brought them to their knees. Their families had left. Anything to end sanctions. They just wanted change. And so that was what was in their minds when they went to the polls. There was incredible enthusiasm. We received, as the polls were closing, we received photos from many of these people sending us via WhatsApp celebrations. Many of these people sent us the tallies. What happens when you vote in Venezuela, each table that has a voting booth has to have observers that are vetted. And so each party is allowed to have its set of observers. And the electoral process emits what looks like a receipt with the tally of that particular ballot box. And each of the observers has to sign that receipt. And so we were getting dozens and dozens of these receipts. And pretty much what we were seeing was that the opposition was doubling the votes for Maduro. Well, we went to bed and nothing had been announced, but people were already celebrating in the streets. We were cautious because everybody was cautious because there was no final announcement. The CNE is the National Electoral Board. They receive all the reports electronically throughout the country of those receipts. They were silent until about 1 a.m. on July 29th. And all of a sudden on TV, the head of the Electoral Board appeared, and he announced that Maduro had won with 51% of the vote. This was at 1 a.m. and so many people were still sleeping. The next morning, the next following days, the opposition, they were quiet at first. They took the first 24 hours and said almost nothing. And what they did was hold a press conference at the end of the day, and they had collected the tallies of their observers, which represented apparently 80% of the vote, showing that their candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, doubled the votes of Maduro. One of the only international groups allowed to observe was the Carter Center. I'm going to read what they said here. Venezuela's 2024 presidential elections did not meet international standards of electoral integrity and cannot be considered democratic. The Carter Center cannot verify or corroborate the results of the election declared by the National Electoral Council, and the electoral authorities' failure to announce disaggregated results by polling station constitutes a serious breach of electoral principles. Venezuela's electoral process did not meet the international standards of electoral integrity at any of its stages and violated numerous provisions of its own national laws. The elections took place in an environment of restricted freedoms for political actors, civil society organizations, and the media. Throughout the electoral process, the CNE demonstrated a clear bias in favor of the incumbent. These to the left are those receipts that are received. Both the Washington Post and the New York Times did their own analysis, which they feel pretty much reflected the statistics of the opposition, in which the opposition just about doubled the votes of Maduro. Well, you can imagine the reactions the next morning throughout the country. There was anger. There was fury. People took the streets. Of course, then the police and the military were sent into the streets. tear gas, shooting, along with them, what's called the colectivos, some of the armed paramilitaries that support the government. And a set of really tragic days ensued. There's so many different scenes. The result in the past days has been 23 civilians have been killed and 4 police and military have been killed. And 2,200 people are now in jail. President Maduro has said there will be no justice for them. He said there will just be the worst of all jails is what awaits them. The next days as well, you know, all the information we were receiving was through WhatsApp, through, I don't do social media, but we do WhatsApp and do, you know, Telegram, Signal, etc. And so people were passing images and images and images of what was happening, especially the shooting especially in poor communities, shooting in the streets. And so a reaction to that was that the police came out with the equivalent of the FBI, it's CICPC, what they called Operation Tuntum, which means you can denounce anybody that you think is instigating hate. So supposedly that had neither political side, if it were left or right or pro or anti-government, but it became it unleashed the ability of the police and the military to go into the streets and seize cell phones. We have many testimonies of this. Our friends in Venezuela, one young woman, I think she's 16 years old, she went to go to the street to get food for her lunch, her mother to make lunch. A truck of military just descended upon the barrio, armed, shooting, started chasing her. She had to get in a motor taxi. They were after her cell phone just to see if she had any images of anything promoting the opposition or any anti-government images. And so many people, all they had to do was pay. It was apparently $40 if you wanted to pay a police to give your cell phone back, but many others were taken to jail just for images that they had on their cell phones. So meanwhile, President Chavez also went on public TV a few days ago to say that he was going to outlaw WhatsApp. I'm not sure how you can do that, but that was the declaration. So people started migrating to Telegram, Signal, etc. Oh, did this again. I'm so sorry. And I'm almost done because I want to leave for questions, but I'm sorry. My low tech skills here. Okay, almost to the point where going to end here. Just want to say many international human rights groups have come together to share a voice in raising concern for the human rights situation. International organizations condemn the high levels of violence and repression and demand that authorities guarantee the right to protest and full respect for the rights to life, personal integrity, and freedom. So what I think people within Venezuela and outside of Venezuela are calling is for the release of the results, which have still not been released. But meanwhile, the opposition is also calling on the Venezuela armed forces to heed what was the voice of the people, which they feel like was not, you know, for Maduro, but for their candidate. And just yesterday, I think the Venezuela authorities declared that they will be prosecuted for inciting, you know, an armed force to turn against its own government. So where the story ends now is that Maduro has asked the Supreme Court, which is pretty much all on the side of the government, to review the votes and to make a declaration. As I said, meanwhile, the National Electoral Board has not released any results. They've not released any specific results, specific voting centers. They've only given the overall figure. As many people have noted, it's almost impossible for Nicolás Maduro to turn over power. As one of his former ministers said, the price to leave Miraflores is just way too high. He is under investigation by the International Criminal Court for torture, sexual violence, and arbitrary detention. So if he were to leave, even though there may be some sort of amnesty with the opposing party, he would still face international tribunals. And the US has also put a 50 million bounty on his head. So many countries have spoken out against the elections. You can imagine it's the United States, the EU, many Latin American countries, those who've applauded elections, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Nicaragua, Cuba. But where a lot of hope is right now are the three countries of Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, who have not declared really where they stand. They've asked him to release results, and they're asking to have dialogue. And I'm going to end almost here. One more slide. This is just for me. So many people have written me how I feel, and many just wonderful people who went on delegations with me said, Lisa, but this is the victory of the people, the left. And what I say is that I feel like there's neither left nor right anymore in Venezuela. It's all a blur. But what this moment calls us for is a moment of defending human rights and a moment of defending democracy. So the question is, what will the US response be? And I can talk about this more in questions. But we need to really be careful about what we're going to do with sanctions. We need to be careful about our migration policy. And we need to let Latin America lead, because everything we've done regarding Venezuela has been so wrong that it's really contributed to the problem. And I'm going to end with this final picture. These are the kids in my program, the kids that we worked with, planting with shortly before I left. Most of them are now 18. We're able to vote and are very saddened by this moment. As I'm just going to end by reading one of them, the girl in the middle in pink, Nazaré. I asked her what she'd want to say, and she said, "It's hard what's happening here in Venezuela. We all wonder what will happen to our future. I feel anxiety and sadness to see how our beloved Venezuela continues. The only thing left is to hope that this government can be removed. I would like to say so many things, but most of them will be negative. And when I see so many things and feel that nothing will change, I keep my words and continue trusting that there is a God who can change people, and also Venezuela." So I will end there, and I should try to figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Stop share. And I'll turn it over to Thomas for leading questions.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that wonderful overview. We really did get a sense of the context that came before, and then what really, I think no one really knows what to expect, but I think we had a very good picture of what's currently happening. I have a question. I'm really curious about the role of the Venezuelan Supreme Court that has planted the seeds of political turmoil. Could you speak more on that and the Supreme Court structure and history of corruption?
Yeah, and I wish I had more details. The Supreme Court, which is the Supreme Tribunal is called in Venezuela, has undergone many changes. It at one point was expanded, at one point was dispatched, new people were elected, but basically at this point, it's very much, as are all Venezuelan institutions at this point, the National Assembly as well, is pretty much, I would say, 90% in the hands of the government, to the government party. So likewise, the National Tribunal. So the request of Maduro, in other words, rather than insist that the electoral board release the tally, his request is that the Supreme Court take a look at everything they have and make a declaration, So they have announced, this could take a while. This could take as much as a month. So it's just passing it on to another. I think I put a quote on that picture of the Supreme Court, in which the Carter Center also made a declaration about that. It says, you're just asking another within the same government entity to make a declaration on something which is already controlled by the government. So it's a really inside situation.
On a related question, you mentioned that in your presentation that the Constitution had recently been rewritten. Do you think that to properly resolve this current crisis if a new constitutional rewrite is required, or do you think that the current constitution can be enforced and that would be enough?
Well, I think the current constitution is really clear about citizen participation, and Venezuela is known for having a really excellent electoral process. And as things were carried out, there were certain glitches, certain small incidents of violence, et cetera, and certain small incidents where some of the observers weren't allowed to be seated. But I think it went through very smoothly. The problem is the actual board has not released the results. They just made a declaration without showing how that happened. And so I don't think it's a matter of writing a new constitution. I think it's a matter of following through the laws that they already have. So yeah, that'd be my response.
Could you tell us a little bit more about who Gonzalez is and what his background is?
Yeah. So not many people knew him too well. He was a diplomat. And I think he retired shortly after, maybe 3 years or so after Chavez came into the presidency. He served a number of posts as a diplomat, but he was not a person who was in people's sight. As a matter of fact, in most of their rallies, he rarely speaks, and when he does, he's a very soft-spoken man. Yes, I don't know. I don't really have that much say. I know some people said, well, he was in El Salvador when the death squads were in El Salvador, so he must be part of the death squads or part of the SOA, but having been part of the SOA Watch movement, he has nothing to do with the SOA Watch. So I think people need to be careful just by connecting one thing, that this means that this is some, we need to be careful in investigating and what is said. But what appears to be is that he was a pretty bland personality that would allow Maria Corina Machado to kind of really be the one who ran the campaign and be the one people were suspecting would she be nominated vice president. So I think he was chosen precisely because he had a very low profile and very kind of, quite demeanor.
What would you say, given that WhatsApp seems to be if that becomes phased out, how are you going to be able to manage to communicate, or how will groups be able to communicate the realities of their situation?
Yeah, well, already people have migrated. People, in Venezuela, people like to put like what they call that their updates on their WhatsApp profile. And so, throughout the day, we could see all sorts of information. They would often post a lot of really helpful information. Actually, we saw many of the receipts from the different, electoral centers. And so no one is posting almost anything there. People have gone quiet. And some of them have migrated, as I said, to Telegram. But I think the fear is that their phones are being taken. It's a tool for corruption, because by being told what it's been declared is that anything against the government or against, quote, democracy is going to be interpreted as crimes of hate. And so if the police find you with a crime of hate on your phone, then you will be, jailed. And so, like, once again, it's pretty much been used for corruption. So people come into a neighborhood, take people's phones, and they say, well, give me $20, give me $40, give me $60, and you can have your phone back and not go to jail. So, but it's silenced everybody. And so that's why, our young friend Nasa and so many just feel that frustration. It's, so you want change. So you try to have change through elections, and you put enthusiasm and participation, and you go to the polls massively, but that result is not respected. And so you're frustrated and you go into the streets, and so you're put into jail or killed. And so you can't even, all the media in Venezuela is pretty much controlled by the government as well. So, what recourse? And yet, sadly, the recourse for many is going to be more migration. I mean, how many more Venezuelans can leave? And incredibly, the US, days after the election, which they are saying weren't valid, that the US came out and declared that, you know, it was Gonzalez who won. They should have just kept quiet in my mind. But they came out also and said that the specific the US was allowing 30,000 Venezuelan immigrants per month as long as they filed legally from where they were. They took away that privilege. And so knowing that more and more migrants are going to try to come. And so here they are realizing this situation has happened. So much of the economic situation has been because of sanctions, because honestly, so many people, what they were voting for was any change so that there aren't sanctions, so that they could have a country again, an economy again, and yet doing all they can right away to block any possible migration. So I think that's where we need to look at ourselves. I think, you know, when I put out the question, what is the role of the US? The role of the US, first of all, it really can have no opinion because it's done the wrong thing so many times in recognizing presidents who were not elected in Venezuela. And I think it's only that's emboldened, that's empowered Maduro tremendously. And it needs to look at sanctions and the destructions that those have caused. And it needs to look at the issue of migration, and not only migration of Venezuelans to the US, but migration to other neighboring countries. And how can the US or other countries help that situation? Colombia has been amazing in receiving millions of Venezuelans. Where's the funding to back that? So, the US's hands are really tied. Again, I think there's a lot of hope that some of the more leftist Venezuelan countries, Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia, they're insisting that the CNE turn over the tallies, but they have not yet called fraud, and they're trying everything they can to come to some kind of a diplomatic solution. Again, I think that's going to be extremely hard given all that Maduro has to lose if he were to leave power. So I don't know if anybody else has a solution among the friends here.
I have a question. You mentioned the colectivos very briefly, but maybe you could explain a little bit more what they are and how they are fitting into this larger dynamic.
Mm-hmm. And that would depend on who you ask the question to, because, there are people who see the colectivos as kind of the armed defense of the revolution. So it's people pretty much in the more popular sectors of the country who have organized in support of the Bolivarian Revolution and will, through being armed and threatening with armed struggle, will make sure that, that what needs to be done is done. Whether that be distributing the food bags, for example, that the government gives out. So some people may say, well, they do that. But on the other hand, there's, and I've seen them, they take the streets if there's any protest, and they're armed and they shoot, and, they take it on themselves to carry out what they think is the desire of the revolution. And so, yeah.
I have a question here. Thank you, Lisa. Most of my friends, many of whom have spent time in Venezuela, say that in the US, we should demand ending sanctions and against US intervention, but that also, even if Maduro lost, it is better he is president than Machado and Gonzalez because she is allied with Bolsonaro and a bunch of other people. What is your answer?
Well, my answer is not up to us at all. It's absolutely not up to us. It's up to respecting what the Venezuelan people want. And it was clear throughout the world that Venezuelan people want to change. So massively, a massive expression of that. And that voice has been silenced very powerfully. And so I don't know what, Gonzalez would have been. I can't guess, but I do know the deep desire of the people I know in Venezuela, and they just are clamoring for change, for change, and for an opportunity, young people, especially for an opportunity to find opportunity in their own country and not have to leave for that opportunity. So it's not up to us. Yeah. And I do need to say that I've seen destruction through the past 10 years of the country, both by sanctions, but by a very inept government and very corrupt, extremely corrupt. I mean, I left because of that. I wasn't allowed to renew my own visa, nor were many people, short of paying tens of thousands, $20,000. I've seen the absolute destruction of the environment through illegal mining. And so it's a country that's just shattered from all sides, really. And so people want change, and they've just put up with so much. So, you know, many of them say to me, Lisa, tell the international community to save us, help us. But, you know, again, I think especially from the US, let's at least not make it worse. You know, sectoral, total country sanctions only hurt the people. And that's not the way. And so how can we allow Latin America to lead and find a way out of this situation, would be my response.
And one last question, which is one that I think you and I both want the answer to, which is what do you think will happen next? Knowing that no one can really see the future.
Yeah.
And
yeah, you know, I switched so quickly, you know, from hope to mourning, because I did envision a change that would allow my family to come back. You know, just young people. I just envisioned this change, whatever it was, a change, an opening, a door opening. And now it seems to have just really slammed shut. And it's Venezuela's become kind of a pawn in the global political scheme. And that's why, honestly, I have a hard time, even when, you know, beautiful friends and people in the US, they want Venezuela to be this leftist icon that is perfect, and it's not, you know. And so, you know, rather than listen to what people want there, we want them to be to the left, or we want them to be to the right, or we want them to be, well, whatever we want them to be. And they've been smothered by US interest for oil, and now they're being smothered by China and Russia's interest for oil. And you know, my hope is that we don't lose sight of the people. We don't lose sight of human rights abuses there. We don't lose sight of listening, of finding a way to engage people. People are having a hard time to do that. So I'm shocked that many Latin American solidarity groups honestly don't deal with Venezuela. They deal with other countries, that I can't quite figure that out. And so I think there needs to be a much more robust response of solidarity towards the people of Venezuela.
well, thank you so much for covering a whole lot of time, and this, of course, this particular situation that we're all very interested in. And thank you to all who attended, and for those who submitted questions. The video, and I think we can release the slides too, right? Those will be available, so they'll come in an email shortly after we conclude this webinar. The event's been live streamed to YouTube, so that link is already available. And then some other housekeeping.
See that Peter raised his hand. Is there time for Peter?
Oh, let's see. Peter, could you submit your question in the chat? Oh, and a couple other questions.
Yeah.
If you could just submit any comments in the webinar chat, we'll leave that open for a while so that everyone can type.
Yeah, it's so great. I can't see all the names, but I know many amazing people who've given so much to Venezuela are here present. I would love to hear your opinions. In some way, maybe we need to think about how we can form more of a solidarity group for the people of Venezuela, not left, not right, but the people, and how we can together engage and be there for them and give back some of what they've given to so many of us. So thanks to everybody, and look forward to keeping connected.
Here's a very good question. I might be good to end on. What would you think? What would solidarity look like? What are some solidarity actions we can take?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. I think there are beginning to be statements from some key human rights groups about Venezuela. And so if we could kind of get behind them, calling for, respect for human rights, I think also on the issue of migration, that we just need to be really vigilant, really aware of. This is a country that's just has no out. And so how can we also make different other possibilities available? But yeah, I again would love to see some kind of more of a solidarity network formed around this.
All right, and to those who are asking, the chat, we'll be able to look over it. Any comments that you leave behind will definitely get in front of us, and we'll have a record of that.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you all so much.